Welcome to the Real Estate Show with Pat Lopez, where we talk everything real estate. Today, my guest is Alan Kinson from Kinson PC. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Okay, so we have a really exciting topic to cover. That's Act 52, where wholesalers now have to be licensed. So it's brand new. January it started. So there's a lot of confusion. So Alan, give us some of the highlights.
All right. So last summer, the state Senate and the state House passed a law which requires wholesalers to, again, as you stated, to be licensed under the Real Estate Licensing Act in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So before there was, the wholesalers were kind of acting under the radar screen. There was no registration process of being a wholesaler.
Right.
And a lot of these deals went under the radar screen. And, you see a lot of these for sale by owner situations where you would have someone who would look at a property and reach out to the property owner and say, I want to buy this property for X.
Right.
But they really had no intention to buy it for X. What they were doing was setting the floor for themselves as, okay, I got the property owner under a certain price. Now I'm going to independently market that property and I'm going to sell it for Y. I'm going to get a buyer to step into my shoes and I'm going to make the difference in price between what I got the property owner to agree to and what I got the buyer to. And there was just there was no regulation regarding it. And, even the closings were a little bit questionable. So a lot of people were getting taken advantage of because they were losing equity in their homes and their properties that they didn't know the value of.
Right. So that's basically wholesaling. And now with Act 52, the wholesalers have to be licensed agents.
That's right. So now they're deemed as agents under the law. And so under the law, a salesperson has to act under the supervision of a broker. And that's really important because now all transactions have to flow through that broker, including the commissions.
Right. So if you signed a contract for $200,000 and then you assign that contract to the end buyer for $250,000, in theory, that $50,000 has to go through the brokerage.
That's right. And before, what would happen is you would have potentially not dual closings, but really you had unsophisticated parties that really didn't know what was going on. There was some funny business in some of these settlement statements. Now everything's above board where, again, that $50,000 would go to the brokerage and then the brokerage would pay their salesperson like any other salesperson out of those commissions.
Right. Now, one question that just popped in my head would be your fiduciary responsibility. So technically, if you're a licensed agent, doesn't that sort of muddy the waters a little bit? Because typically, hey, I'm going to make 2%, 3% commission. Now I may be making 10 or 15% commission because now I'm making so much more money. Isn't that a little bit of a gray area there?
Well, no. So let's talk about some of the definitions with the real estate. You have a broker and an associate broker. You have a salesperson who can either be a listing agent, a buyer's agent, a dual agent, designated dual agency, and then you have transaction licensees, right? So a transaction licensee is not representing anyone. They're just doing administrative tasks like calling people up to schedule home inspections, maybe get some information from the relevant parties, but they're not actually giving advice. Right. They don't even need to be licensed, honestly. Then you have the agents themselves, the salespeople, who are representing the various parties, whether it's the seller or the buyer. And again, they can't collect the commission directly. They work through their associate broker and the broker. Right. And the broker is the one who actually collects the commissions. They oversee all of these parties here. So it was funny, I was thinking about this. There's no real definition that the wholesaler falls into. Right. They're not a broker, obviously, because they have to work through the broker. They're not really they could be an agent, but they're not acting as an agent. There's no fiduciary obligation. And I guess the best definition that they would fall into is as a transaction licensee. But they owe no fiduciary obligation meaning the wholesaler, to the seller or to the buyer, because, the end buyer, because they're not acting in that capacity. So what you could kind of equate the commission owed is almost like a net commission of relationship. Most commissions that are owed are on a percentage basis.
Right.
You've heard like 4 to 8%.
Right.
You know, $100,000 deal, maybe there's an 8% commission, not that high usually, but like, you know, that's split between the seller and the buyer, or maybe not split at all.
Right.
Here, you can have a situation where maybe the end is $100,000, right? Like that's the end sale. Maybe this wholesaler goes to the seller and to the property owner and says, I will buy this property for $50,000 with no intention to buy it.
Right.
That's wholesaling 101.
Right.
That $50,000 difference is what the commission would be. That's almost like a net commission situation where if I was the listing agent, I can also go to the property owner and say, listen, I'm going to list this property for 50, or I agree that I'm going to pay the first $50,000 of the proceeds from this property. Anything above that, I'm entitled to. The difference with the wholesaler versus the listing agent with the net commission is that the agent with the net commission owes a fiduciary responsibility to their property owner, to their client, the seller. Here with the wholesaler, there is no fiduciary obligation.
Now, also, beyond the licenses, requirement, now you have disclosures.
That's right.
So what do those disclosures look like? Because now you have to state that, hey, I'm going to sign the contract to somebody else. I'm not physically going to buy it. I'm going to sign the contract, and this is what I'm slated to make. That was my understanding. I may be wrong. So you tell me.
So the first thing is you have to explain that this is a potential wholesale situation. Again, let's just go into like real estate law 101. Every property has legal title and equitable title. When you own a property, you have legal title and equitable title to the property. When you are under agreement with someone, you as the property owner are transferring equitable title to the property to the wholesaler. That's what the wholesaler is selling.
Right.
They're selling equitable title to the property, the opportunity to eventually close on the deal and can get the legal title. So you have to explain that I'm a wholesaler. I have no intention, essentially, let's speak crudely, to purchase this property. I am intending to sell it to some end user, and I'm giving you that notice. Then I'm telling you this, that you should at least think about reaching out to an appraiser and seeing what the property is really worth. You should also seek legal advice as well.
Right.
So first disclosure, this is a wholesale situation. Right. Second disclosure, you should seek competent legal advice and or get at least an appraisal to see what that property is really worth.
Right.
Third disclosure is this. If you are unhappy for any reason within the lesser of 30 days from the time you sign the contract with me or the date of closing, and you decide, you know what, I don't want to go forward in this transaction anymore, you have the right to cancel this contract. And like canceling the contract means that the contract goes poof.
Right.
And that if the wholesaler has any money towards the actual contract, like in escrow, those monies will be returned within 10 business days.
Okay. Now, what about disclosing how much you're going to make? I thought I read something like that. Do they have to disclose what the wholesaler believes they're going to make on the transfer of the contract?
I believe so. I believe so as well. It's full disclosure on these things. Well, I don't know if you have to disclose what you're going to make because you don't know at this time.
Right.
You don't know what you're going to do at this time. I do think now is putting everyone on notice, like eventually what you eventually will make because you'll have a settlement sheet. Listen, I'm a real estate attorney. Of course, it's in my interest to say that everyone should have competent legal advice at all times. But for most people, it's the biggest transaction of their lifetimes. And if someone was selling a business or buying a business for $100,000 even, they would lawyer up.
Right.
Anyone who handles a real estate transaction on their own is, making a questionable legal decision or business decision. Right. They should hire competent legal counsel.
Perfect. Okay, and then the last thing is, because now you're licensed, you're under the preview of the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission.
That's right.
So now there's penalties that you can have, legal actions and everything else, right?
That's right. And by the way, you have to be eligible to get a license. And I'm not saying this happens with all wholesalers. There are a lot of realtors that I know that do wholesaling on the side. Right. But there are some people who wholesale because they couldn't get a real estate license. There's requirements.
Right.
First of all, there's educational requirements, right? You have to take so many hours of classes and pass the test. One of the things I do, besides being an attorney, I'm an adjunct professor at the Fox School of Business. I actually teach one of the courses that you have to take to actually be eligible to take the real estate exam.
Right.
You have to do that. You have to pass the exam. And then there's a whole background check.
Right.
And there's some people who cannot pass that background check. You may not know this, but in Philadelphia, they had a wholesaler law in effect for a few years where you had to register as a wholesaler, and there were notice requirements as well. So again, it's just basically shedding to light what everyone should know about this type of transaction.
Right. And then I spoke to a couple brokers that said that they had wholesalers reach out to them and say, listen, I took the test, I passed, I want to hang my license, this is the type of business I do. And both of them said they didn't take the people on because when they called their E&O insurance, they said they don't cover those kind of transactions. So that's liability for the broker, no?
Yeah, and is it making wholesaling illegal in Pennsylvania, this law? No. But in actuality, it may, because if brokerages are not going to be covered by these type of transactions, less and less brokerages are going to take that risk.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes, perfect sense. Like why as a broker would you put yourself out there for these kind of transactions when they could be the most potentially litigated transactions?
Well, I mean, they're also lucrative, right? So no risk, no reward.
Right.
So some people are willing to take those risks.
Right. Guess what? You're right. Okay, so anything else we should know about wholesaling? It's brand new.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked about those written disclosures, right? They have to be prominently displayed on the contract. I would put them in caps. I would put them in bold. I would put them in the front. There's supposedly regulations that are going to go into effect by the Real Estate Commission. As a lawyer, what I would think is in order to protect the wholesaler's interest in the property, to make sure that the seller property owner had full knowledge of this, because they're going to be protective of that seller property owner, I would have it specifically signed, like, DocuSign, a separate document saying, point A, point B, point C, what we discussed, and make them prominently sign it as well.
Right, and generally PAR, they will put, those, disclosures in, with the traditional sales contracts that you would have. So I would imagine maybe they're producing some stuff as well.
So actually today I was talking to someone, I teach a lot, besides, talking on podcasts, I was talking to someone who I may teach actually going to teach a local chapter of GPAR, and she was talking to GPAR's general counsel, and I don't know if the Realtor Association is going to create these forms. So, I mean, I think they should, at the very least. I would. We don't represent wholesalers, but if I have a client that's dealing with a wholesale situation, I would demand that certain disclosures are made.
Right. Yeah, that would be, super smart. Okay, and then you talked about teaching, many times you write, you teach, one of the top real estate attorneys, but on top of that, you have Nakasum U, and you also go to different real estate offices, title companies, whoever wants information and teach. You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So, literally half my life I've been practicing law. And, I teach a course at Temple University. I've been writing a monthly real estate column for over 20 years. I teach attorneys real estate law. So last year, I came up with the initiative of Nakasum U, where I do go to the brokerages and the title companies. And, I state to them, listen, I have a lot to offer. You tell me what you're paying. I know because I represent, do a lot of transactions, but we streamline and tailor lunches and learns where we talk about anything. Like we've talked about the top five mistakes realtors make with dealing with tax abated properties or new construction properties. I just did a Nakasum U at MSC Retail that does all of the commercial retail in Center City, Philadelphia, where I did the top 10 commercial lease clauses. So it started last year as a hodgepodge are just reaching out to the brokerages. And now we have a number of brokerages where we're actually speaking to their group on a quarterly basis. I just did one at Compass Real Estate in Center City, and the broker was walking me after the presentation. The broker was walking me out and said, "I know you're doing four of these, one every quarter, but I have one more idea.
Right.
Can you do this too?" And I said, "Okay, sure."
Sure. Perfect. Now, if somebody wants to reach out to you in reference to that, what would be the best way to do that?
I would say my email address which is Alan, ALAN.Nachumson, NOCHUMSON, @Nachumson.com. They can also call my landline, which is 215-600-2851.
Perfect. Reach out. I've been to a couple of his classes. Very good, very good. So I really appreciate you coming in. Like every time there's something new, you're the first one I get on the phone. Hey, Alan, can you come in? Let's talk about this.
That's right. You know, it also forces me, like whether it's these podcasts, teaching, writing, it forces me to tune my understanding of the law.
Right.
So, and then this is really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of wholesaling going on in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the people are going to still do it under the radar screen. But, you know, there's penalties involved for people who are practicing real estate without a license.
Right.
And now there's actual teeth to this law, which didn't exist previously.
Right. Well, that's the Real Estate Show with Pat Lopez. Be sure to follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. Be sure to subscribe. I have great guests like Alan on all the time. Also, leave a comment. Tell me things that you like, you don't like, and tell me some topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Remember, this show is everything real estate, no limits. Hope you enjoyed everything. And